to the eighth episode of Spinning Wheels. If this is the first one you've stumbled on YouTube or on iTunes, then wow, have you got an adventure to catch up on when you go back and listen to the full series. We've done just about all forms of four-wheeled motorsport that there is in the series so far, and that's probably a good way of describing my co-host, Guy Smith, as well. Guy, from F1 to Indy, touring cars to World Rally and sports cars, if you had to suggest to someone who hasn't heard any of the episodes so far, apart from this one, where to start, where should they start?
Well, I suggest to listen to all of them, but I think the best place to start is the first one with Mike Simpson, and kind of listen to them all the way through, really. As you say, it's been a fantastic journey. We've listened to some great stories so far, and I think we've covered just about all forms of four-wheel motorsport, from, say, rallying to Formula One to sports cars. I think we've just about covered them all. I think today we might even cover some more bases. So I'm looking forward to today, so it should be good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of American motorsport, and we haven't yet covered in any way, shape or form NASCAR. So we'll come to that. I have a giant inflatable NASCAR behind me. It's not very good radio, but if you're on the YouTube version, you'll be able to see that. But before we get to that, there is the small matter of not one, but two American Le Mans Series championships. Today's guest is part of an American name which I described on social media as a dynasty in car racing, which means to a motorsport enthusiast like me, I am once again on this podcast surrounded by motorsport royalty. Welcome to Spinning Wheels, Chris Dyson.
Wow, what an introduction. I get called a lot worse, especially during the lockdown, so I'm flattered. Great to be here with you guys.
What have you been doing in lockdown? Have you managed to get out in a car?
I've driven the Suburban a lot. I've gone to the shop quite a bit and just talked to my race cars, which are stationary. I'm excited that it's looking like it's resuming. So, I've avoided the sim racing crusade, really just out of hopes that real racing would resume.
I've enjoyed your cynicism with the iRacing, I've got to say.
I think we would call that realism, probably more than cynicism. But then again, I'm of a certain age. So, but yeah, racing-wise, we're looking like the Trans Am Series is going to resume in a couple of weeks. That gives me a lot of hope, a lot of optimism. I think at first it was literally spinning wheels, right? And the podcast name was apt for the times, I think. And from my standpoint too, the racing is seasonal, right? So you set your year around it. And this has been kind of a fairly major disruption to everybody. Athletically, just keeping the motivation up. Nothing excites you more than getting in a race car. And at the same time, there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of calamity going on in the real world. So it sort of balances your mood swings. For every bit of frustration you have for not being able to do what you love, you really should be thankful that you got to do it in the first place. And Guy and I have had the best time together. It's looking like we're going to go racing in about 2 weeks. So I'm working hard to just keep myself fit. And I'm probably going to get back in a race car in the next week or so to do a shakedown and just get sharpened up for Mid-Ohio with the Trans Am Series.
I have no doubt that we'll see that on social media. But where did it all start for you? That's lockdown, that's now. But where did it all start for someone like you in motor racing?
Well, it started before I started. My dad was involved in the sport really starting in the mid-1970s, and at first just started racing amateur SCCA regionals, then nationals. By the time I could remember, he was a national champion. We were running the cars, which were sedan SCCA cars, Datsuns, out of our barn garage. So my entire kind of formative years, really up until about age 6, the race team was on site. So every day that I was around, race cars were around me. And my father and our crew, which was a small group at that time, grew to more. It was always there in the background, and I kind of grew up in a totally immersive environment around it. And whether my folks wanted to or not, there's just this osmosis thing that racing does with second generation drivers. And I think I became afflicted with it at a very, very young age. I spent a lot of my summers in elementary school on the hillsides of the great circuits of the IMSA Camel GT series at its peak. And that left a very strong impression with me. But we were always going to races. We were always going out to Lime Rock. There were always local races. Modified racing is very big in New York State. So we would go over to Orange County Speedway. Lime Rock was our home track. Would drive with my dad to Watkins Glen. So even just in the Northeast, it was a big deal for us. And one of the coolest things was going to the street circuits as a 9 and 10-year-old. And back then, being a 1980s kids, it was free range parenting. Get to the track, don't get in trouble, just explore yourself. Go out.
They still do that at racetracks, believe me.
No, it was great. I mean, it was totally an amazing upbringing. I mean, at the time, it didn't feel normal, but I realized it was deeply abnormal to get that kind of exposure to it. And there's really just a handful of us, Todd Holbert, Alex Gurney, the small group that were kind of there during the GTP heyday. But it was inspirational. I mean, those cars were fire-breathing monsters, and it was 80s, so it was wretched excess. The only restrictors on the engines were the holes in them if you pushed them too hard. And it was a special time, a lot of fanfare, a lot of promotion. You couldn't help but say, I think, if you were remotely competitive, wow, this is the peak of this type of sport. I want to get there someday. And from a driving standpoint, parents were very reserved about it. They didn't push it. So even though I was kind of around it and it was kind of ubiquitous in our lives, as far as pushing me to do anything, it was non-existent. In fact, I think there was a desperate hope I wasn't going to do it. I was a stick and ball athlete. I played baseball and basketball throughout my youth. Team sports, loved them, still love them. But, inevitably there was a go-kart track nearby the house, and there were go-karts that were in the shop that I put back together, and my friend Randall Kelsey and I went out and drove through his poor parents. We destroyed their lawn. We almost killed his brother. That's its own story. And eventually, my dad just said, look, we probably should put you guys on racetracks. So Randall and I started going racing together, and, really within the next, that was probably 1993-ish. And by the sort of late 90s, we were both going racing again. And that was how I guess it started. First experience with cars was in 99. Karting had gone really well. We had a very active oval circuit, dirt racing actually, dirt ovals in New York State, the IKF. And it was going very well until I had a pretty massive accident right in front of my mom and broke my collarbone. And she had to dress me for the next 2.5 months. She reminds me of this. I think at that point they thought that would break me, but actually that only made me more determined. But at that point, a lot of racing was kind of like, look, you're going to get hurt, you could possibly get hurt. But I kept agitating, went to Skip Barber when I was 16, got my racing license, and then didn't do anything with it, really. I mean, it was kind of like go to school, go to college. And then finally, freshman, sophomore year, I started rolling the go-kart back out quietly. I didn't tell my father we were doing it, but we started going karting again. And I brought a first place trophy home, and I'll never forget the next day he wrote a Post-it note and he said, well, if you're going to do it, you might as well be good at it. And that was kind of the beginning of me getting into cars.
Did you keep the Post-it note?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a quote from my grandfather. So he
Fantastic.
Actually wrote it, if you're going to be good at it, if you're going to do it, you might as well be good at it. And he quoted C.H. Dyson, which was my grandfather, which Fantastic. I guess is what my grandfather had said to my dad.
Great quote.
25 years ago. So for my poor mother, it was another trip back onto the roller coaster for her.
So Chris, who would you say was the biggest influence in kind of getting you started with racing? Would it be your dad? Or, I mean, obviously you've around so many great drivers, people like Price Cobb that have driven for DRT. I mean, you must have had all those guys to kind of look up to and learn from when you were growing up.
So influence as far as really consolidating my love for the sport and how to go racing. Obviously, Dad and Price were the bedrock, and they're the bedrock for really all of Dyson Racing. The foundation of the team, I think, really goes back to Pat Smith, my dad, and modern DRT, you'd have to say Price, as far as the teammate dynamic, the excellence, the push. James Weaver's right up there because, I mean, you got to remember, I've known James, and we always laugh about this, but I've known James since I was 9 years old. So you can imagine when we were teammates strapping into an LMP car together, 14 years later, it was probably pretty disorienting for him, but it was really cool for me. I'm blessed with influences. I mean, I can't actually single one person out, but from an inspiration standpoint, I think that Dad, James, and Pat were really important to me. And honestly, my mother, from a competitive standpoint, she'll never admit it, but, it wasn't necessarily geared towards racing, but with sport, she was incredibly helpful for me to push me to do well and never accept anything but my best. So I'd have to say that that's the immediate group. And then when we got into racing, I had, a lot of touchstones. Andy Wallace, very important. Elliot Forbes Robinson, extremely important for me.
Yeah. So what was the sort of the next phase then? So you took on from karting and kind of that kind of stuff, then to move into sort of car racing. What was the kind of the transition? What was the first race that you did with?
So
DRT?
I did, yeah. So we did, I mean, we were doing probably 30 or 40 karting races a year. They were regular. We were sometimes double headers, midweek, summer deals. Yeah. And then when we got it,
is it still off-road karting or a kind of mixture? Is it still the dirt stuff or?
No, actually the track that I used to race at is paved now.
Okay.
It's a 5th mile. It's fast. I mean, it's incredible how fast the pavement is, but the dirt was fast then too. So it gave me, because it was the kind of dirt that would calcify and rubber would go down. So I actually probably became very comfortable with high grip pretty early on. So getting into cars, the hardest thing about it was just feeling the weight transfer. Yeah. But my first race car that I raced was a Spec Racer Ford in the SECA, which is probably the equivalent to what Formula Ford is in the UK. And as far as competitor depth, wherever you go in the country, regional, national level, there were going to be 25 cars on the grid, a lot of benchmark guys, and they had regional, national, and pro level. And, I learned a tremendous amount about racecraft. I mean, there were 100 horsepower cars, so you really it was zero scrub driving, but you had to slide them because they were on a DOT radial. But the guys that did that, the specialists in that, were some of the best guys I've ever raced against. And that, because they were veterans, right? There were a lot of guys there that were doing it, that were in their 40s, and that was the car they were racing. And that was, I had some success at that. And then once I started winning nationals, I think everybody started to take it seriously as more than just something that I was trying to test myself at.
Yeah.
The name come with you at that point? Were you arriving at races and people thinking, here we go, there's a Dyson in the lineup?
Well, I mean, you don't want to be conceited about it, but I know that, and we never emblazoned it. I mean, I did I very carefully distanced myself. It wasn't a family run car. I knew it was, to a certain extent, you're going to be a marked man and people want to knock your block off with our family's racing heritage. So it was always important for me day one to establish my own credibility. I ran with a team called Racers Edge Motorsports, which is run by a good friend named John Meraki, whose team has actually been really successful in IMSA and the SRO categories here in the US. John was really important to me early on in my career, but it got me away from being in the building. And eventually I brought my car into the shop. That was its own interesting story, because at that time I was maintaining it for the last few races of 2001. I got a few people that I drafted into it, but I was doing the body work, the maintenance. It was pretty scary, actually, when I think about it, because I was putting myself in the same car that I was preparing. But yeah, the Spec Racer Ford racing was incredible. It still is a very good category. I loved it. I got to do my first 24-hour race in one of those cars down in Moroso in West Palm Beach. And that was a good way to kind of lay the groundwork for what was to come.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of when you made your kind of professional debut, so you were still pretty young when you moved into the sort of sports cars sort of properly. Didn't you do Daytona? Was that one of your sort of first races, 24 hours? I mean,
so it's an interesting story, because I leapfrogged almost the entire ladder, and that's kind of so typical of my dad. He in essence throws it out there, a challenge, and says, go get it. And, for me, I had obviously a tremendous amount of desire, but you can't replace the experience. And not having started as a 7 or 8 year old karting driver, and, frankly, just, being involved in racing in my teens, Spec Racer Ford was great from a sort of combat fight standpoint, but in terms of, high performance cars, the learning curve was Mount Everest. So, for me, like, I went up to Watkins Glen, and I had just done a few regionals, and we were testing up there for Goodyear. And at the end of the test, Rob and Pat turned to me and said, all right, you're going to get in. And I brought my stuff up just, on the off chance. And I got in the car, and actually it was amazing, because I hadn't driven cars that had built up between the level between 100 horsepower and 750. And, the terminal velocity at the end of the straight in a Spec Racer Ford was 125, 130. I was doing 160 through the S's at Watkins Glen. And it just felt like natural, even though it wasn't something I had been building up to. It literally felt like, yes, this is it. And it's an interesting story how I actually did my first race. And I don't really tell too many people this, but we're on a podcast and it's been like a while. But my dad and I had won a national race in Lime Rock, and then I was leading the championship for the Northeast Division, and looking like I was going to go to the national championships. And we had a race in Watkins Glen like the next week. And my dad and I went out to play golf. And I don't know what the hell, I really don't know what the hell I was even thinking, but we were starting to play golf, and he was playing well, and he was starting to get a little edgy, right? He was starting to get a little full of himself. And I knew that I could smoke him if I played well, because we played a lot of golf when I was a kid. And I don't know what came over me, but I said, Dad, you know what? Let's make this really interesting. Let's play for 10 grand a hole. And I didn't have the money. So I had no idea like the words coming out of my mouth. And I think I beat him with like 5 holes to go. And it finally just literally kicked his rear end. And I think we never talked about payment, but he did say to me like the next week, he's like, why don't you bring your helmet up to Watkins Glen? And that was all I needed. I'd never mentioned the bet again to him.
What car were you driving at the test?
So the test was back in '99. That was the Riley and Scott Ford WST car that we had been very successful with and had a lot of development. So it was a mature package and benchmark drivers with lots of good data. But my first event was actually the Watkins Glen race, the Grand Am race in 2001. And Dad had Elliott Forbes Robinson there with us, and Dad said to me, he said, look, come on up and do a test session, and let's see how it goes. So I came up and I did a test session, and I think I was like third quick, and everyone was like, wow, like that's impressive. And they're like, okay, Dad's like, all right, you're doing the race. I'm like, oh my God. Literally going from like 100 horsepower on a skinny DOT radial to now WSC full ground effect, 750 horsepower.
One of the best tracks.
Yeah, just in the highest grip track, right? So your neck, just the G loading is just otherworldly, right? And I went out and I got in the car. I took over from Elliott. We were running third, and I came in third. I think I might have gotten up to second. And my dad got in the car after me. And unfortunately, we had an electrical problem, so we didn't finish on the podium. But I think at that point, everyone started to say, maybe Chris could do this. And I got the belief in myself at that point, like, wow, yeah, it was a validation, even though the jump was just monumental. I mean, it was training wheels to driving to riding a MotoGP in a couple of weeks.
You've always been really good with like downforce stuff, like when we've always driven together, the sort of faster the corner, the more downforce, the more grip. You've always kind of really excelled at that kind of stuff. Do you think that comes because you were kind of thrown at the deep end, or do you think it comes from the sort of the karting and the sort of that type style of racing, or is it just big kahunas?
Probably all the things you said, plus a mixture of stupidity and faith. But there was a lot to learn. I mean, don't get me wrong. It wasn't, getting in high downforce cars after not driving them, it's belief.
Yeah.
And it's got to be total conviction. And, when you hear a lot about when guys were running the early active suspension cars, and just the fact that you had to trust, that was my experience with going to downforce, was basically trusting that the grip was going to be there. And, the problem is the cars are so physical that to get to that point of trust, you've got to be willing to put your body on a point where you're going to load it up. I think my athletic build probably allowed me to, handle the high loads pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I enjoy fast corners. I think the ovals as a kid, where you're just constantly just railing around corners. That's probably what made faster corners, I don't want to say easier, but intuitive.
Yeah,
maybe.
You have to have a feel, because people think with high-speed corners, you just barrel in and it's pure balls. But actually, you've got to have a real feel for the car, because you're going so quick, aren't you? And you're feeling the tire, you're feeling the kind of setup, and it's not something that you can just force the car to do. You've got to have a real feel for it, because the car's absolutely on the knife edge. Probably closer than in a hairpin, for example. It's a lot more technical, but in high-speed stuff, you've really got to have a feel for what the car can do. And I remember whenever we'd go to Sebring, I'd sort of like do it almost flat and think I was like an absolute, rock star. And then I'd come and look at the data and you've done it flat and I've lifted. I'm like, how are you doing that? It was frustrated the hell out of me, because I thought I was quite ballsy in the high-speed stuff, and you'd always kind of like outdo me. So it's interesting, the different styles. But
you managed to do it flat in the end, Guy.
I probably got there in the end, but I probably scared myself, doing it. But the interesting thing is, in high-speed corners, if you have a lift or do it flat, there's usually not a big time gain. So actually, it would always be there'd be certain corners where you would try and do it flat, and everyone was like, oh, you got it flat. And actually, you look at the data, and you might have a lift, but because you're going so quick, that a small lift versus flat is not that big a difference. So it doesn't always buy you a lot of lap time. I mean, if you're having a big lift, of course it does, but if it's a small feather, it doesn't not make a big difference. But there is the bragging rights of I got it flat versus that you lifted. So, and quite often in your mind you've done it flat, and then you look at the data and your foot's come off. So what was it like? And we've never actually really discussed this, but what was Elliot like to drive with? Because I remember about that time, it must have been 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, because Elliot was the ALMS champion, wasn't he? And I remember him being pretty old, with respect compared to a lot of other drivers. He was quite old at that point, but he was still incredibly fast and competitive. What was he like to sort of drive with? I mean, you two couldn't be more opposite. You just coming into sports cars, and Elliot towards the end of his career. Was he a big help for you?
He was a massive help. The thing about Elliot too is that he's a great big kid. I mean, he is literally he's probably the most competitive person I've ever met on so many levels. And I'll give you an example. He was going to do the 12 Hours of Sebring, and this was at the beginning of 2001 with James and Butch in the Riley and Scott Mark III-C. I wasn't racing with them then, but I was helping the team out. And it was going to be one of the hottest races on record. That's a front-mounted radiator car. He was 50, I think at that point he was 59 years old. And the day before the race is normally a pretty low-key deal on the Friday afternoon. And Elliot, he's got unbelievable energy. I mean, he is, it's not hyper, but it's pretty damn close. But he said to me, he'd go, all right, Chris, what are we going to do this afternoon? And I'd say, I don't know, what do you feel like doing? He goes, you want to go play some tennis? I'm like, oh yeah, sure, let's go play some tennis. And at the condos there, they've got a tennis court. So Elliot goes out, and I'm just thinking we're going to play some volleys. And immediately, after a couple plays, he's like, all right, you would have thought you're at the US Open. I mean, it's 100 degrees outside. He's running out every point and he's grinding out there and you're just dripping with sweat. And you're just like, man, you got like a 12-hour race tomorrow. He's like, yeah, so. And that to me it kind of says everything about Elliott, because he, you know, for his duration of his career and his diversity of cars that he won in over the decades, in addition to being a great guy and a really charismatic guy, he's one of the most unbelievable competitors you'll ever see.
Yeah.
And he was a tough coach too. You know, he wasn't there to blow smoke up my ass, you know, and he was there to level with me. And, you know, he could see that, you know, you're going to have to got to level up. You're going to need someone there to spur you. And I think Elliott for me was a terrific spur. And I'm really appreciative of the time we got to spend together. Not only to watch him as a competitor and how dogged he was in the car, but just how he was always positive with the crew. I mean, tremendously. The crew loved him, but also just how critical he was, you know, quite malcontented about making sure you got the best out of yourself. And I thought that was something that I took some inspiration from.
Was your dad quite involved at this point still, Chris, in what you were doing on the track, or were you very much working on different parts of the team and the project and the racing?
Sorry, Paul, I think I missed the beginning of your question.
Was your dad still quite involved at this stage in what you were doing, or was he very much backed off and letting you do your own thing with the people you had around you?
So, I thought he handled it incredibly well. And, you know, I think if anything, like if he was going to err on one side, he was going to err on leaving me alone, leaving me alone to learn, leaving me alone to fail and to dig myself out. You know, not sitting there with the stopwatch, not, you know, and Guy can say this. I mean, the guy can tell you this, driving for Dad, he's not one of those guys that's just agitated, hanging over the wall, you know, but quietly encouraging, I'd say, is the best way to put it early on. And, you know, kind of always giving that escape route that, like, you know, make sure you're doing this for you. You know, make sure that you're doing this because you want to do it. I'm happy with my race career. I'm happy with what I've been able to do. We've got a great team. You've got to be enjoying it, and you've got to feel like you're getting what I got out of it in terms of enjoyment. And thankfully, that was always the case.
Yeah, I mean,
it must be really tough for him actually at that point. Just you're having to run someone that you care so much about, and you do want them to succeed, but giving them that option, it must have been tough.
Well, I mean, no, Paul, you're absolutely right. And I think that, you know, I don't talk about it too much, but, you know, my parents had really mixed feelings about me getting into racing. You know, my mom was, and my dad both had come of age in the 60s and 70s when it was a very dangerous sport. And they had dealt with the risk, compartmentalized it, I think managed the risk as far as where Dad had raced. But when you have all of a sudden your family and your children are involved in it, I think it becomes a different conversation. And, you know, it was one of these things that Dad had always said, like, I'll do it to the end of this year, or I'll do it to the end of, and you know, at this point he was 20 years into his career, 25 years into his career, and had been successful, but now here they go again. And that, I think that it wasn't really like a guilt thing, but it was more a care thing. You know, my parents just didn't want to see me get hurt because they knew the sport had a cost. And I was up front willing to accept whatever that cost could be, because I just thought that it was so cool. And I just thought it was just so inspiring and so electrifying. And I still do.
I guess for them, Chris, as well, with you being in effectively the family team at DRT, they've also got an element of control, because the people that were working on the car or working in the team are all trusted people. I mean, you know, absolutely first-class guys. You know, I can say that from experience, but I'm sure they had a lot of confidence knowing that you're in the best hands. And I mean, we talked about your dad before. I mean, the one thing I'd say about your dad is obviously he's raced at a very, very high level and a great driver. So he's kind of got that understanding from a driver's point of view. But as a team owner and a car owner, and he never wanted for anything. He was never, if we needed something to go faster on the car, whatever it was, we got it. We had to justify it, but rightly so. But he never said, oh, you can't have this. if we needed something for the next race, we got it. Or if we
What,
needed,
what sorts of things are we talking about?
I mean, it could be a small thing. It might be an extra set of tires. It could be some different shocks, or it might be a redesign on a particular part of the car. I mean, that's something that DRT have always been really strong on. I mean, Chris touched on about the Riley Scott. I mean, that car was kind of developed by DRT over time and made into an absolute conquering, sports car, one of the top sports cars of its time. And again, when DRT took over the Lola AR MG, which, as you know, again, it was a very fast car, a little bit fragile. And DRT took it and over sort of the period of sort of 3-4 years, made it into a bulletproof winning machine. And it's almost like the philosophy. It's almost like this is, I might be wrong, Chris, but it's almost like we don't want something that's quite perfect. We want to Dysonize it. We call it Dysonizing it, where we take it where it's 85% there, and we're going to finish it off. And Pete Weston, who's sort of like the technical director, race engineer, is by trade a designer. So he used to work at Lola. So he would often come up with ideas or theories that he thought could improve the car and make the car better. And he would then go to Rob, and Rob would say, well, prove to me why it's going to be better. And he'd sort of come up with a drawing or whatever. Rob would say, right, I want you to go away and make that and come back with it. And we'd change it and we'd tweak it. And he never once sort of said, oh, no, we're not doing that. It's either too expensive or it's whatever. He's like, if it's going to make the car go faster, do it, and that's real credit to Rob. And again, he was always firm but fair. He was always, I mean, I crashed quite a few cars. He never really kind of bollocked me in any bad way. I mean, if it was my mistake and you owned up to it, it was like, you made a mistake. It happens, but don't do it again. And go and win the race tomorrow, which is all you can never ask for from a team owner, is knowing that they've got your back and they want you to go out there and put it on the line for the team. And there's not many teams or team owners that would do that. So
like a really cool guy.
Yeah, very, 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 very cool guy. So
is this where we get to talk about that big year in 2003, and we get to talk about one of my favorite race cars, that Lola MG? Is that where this comes in?
There, absolutely. And I think to Guy's point, my dad takes pride in our team being essentially hot rodders. And again, it comes back to that DNA of Pat Smith and my dad just getting whatever they got as a car and immediately saying, let's take it apart, let's look at how it works, and let's start making it better by whatever means necessary. Let's focus on the basics, let's focus on the details, let's take it and build with it. And they did that with every single car that we raced, starting with the 962, which had a lot of pioneering innovations that no one else was running. The Riley and Scott Guy mentions, obviously, was a car that my dad had commissioned from Bob and Bill Riley and Mark Scott. It was out of the box good, and I think we made it a lot better. And I think that was the DNA of the team, but that was also the DNA of racing at the time too, was having the freedom of design and expression and change. Been one of the more challenging elements about the current environment, which we don't have to get into necessarily, but certainly with regards to the MD Lola, I think when we got to really early 2001, we had realized that the Riley and Scott Mark IIIC, which was really a step forward from the predecessor, which was the Mark IIIA, the Mark IIIB being the Cadillac, was not enough of a stride, certainly with the Audis coming in with an entirely different aero philosophy, maximizing the current regulations. The Riley was kind of a different previous era. And we started to figure out and think about where else we could be. And we looked at a lot of different options. I mean, Dallara had built a car, which they were running with a Chrysler engine. They later put a Judd in it. There were a lot of approaches and discussions. And I headed up kind of that assessment for the team. That was when I wasn't, I was still driving on an amateur level, but I was working with the team after college. And we put together an assessment of all the possibilities. And certainly James Weaver and I were talking a lot, and we'd recognized, kind of watching Mark Blundell, who we had on previously, and the MG team at Le Mans had really been kind of that one shining star. I mean, Guy was too busy kind of heading towards the front with the podium Bentley cars, but you're looking down the order and you're thinking, who's got the most promise here? Because at the time, our biggest objective was, we've got to find a car that we can win Sebring overall with, because it was the one marquee event that the team hadn't won. And the series that was racing there was the American Le Mans series. So we had to look at ACO style cars. And the MG Lola program was coming unstuck. And Lola wanted to start, and AER wanted to start getting it into private hands so they could continue the program. And we were fortunate to be able to get started with them. I think we were trying to do it earlier than we did, but we ultimately took it on in sort of springtime of 2002, completely covertly. No one knew about it. In fact, we told the ALMS series officials about it like a week before Mid-Ohio, or at Mid-Ohio, and we were going to enter it at Mosport in like a couple of weekends. And,
it was still running in Works' hands in 2002, wasn't it, that car?
Yes, it was, but the program was ending after Le Mans. And, the vendors, the partners, Lola and AER particularly, had planned on the program being a multi-year deal. So they had some developments and ideas in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And we were able to pick that program up and start running with it, and ran it for the last few races of 02, all of 03, all of 04, and all of 05.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And it gave you that first championship, of course.
Yeah, that was quite a great thing, because we had just missed the championship in 2002. So after Watkins Glen in 01, I had done the Daytona race in the end of 01, and then in 02 there was really no plan. The plan was to go and defend the Grand Am championship, which James and Butch had won the previous 2 years. But for me personally, there was not a kind of, okay, Chris, you're going to do this season, so come and do the long races. And I mean, at this point, I was just getting myself ready for whatever was coming. There was no fixed plan. And then we ran Daytona. It went well, and starting at Phoenix that year, I won my first race with James, and we ended up winning 4 more races, and we missed the championship by 2 points, which was kind of not really a bitter disappointment, but it got me in the mindset early on of wow, I'm in this thing. I'm in the championship race. I mean, the very first year with a team that has no excuses, it was an enormous amount of pressure. And then 2003, it was the first year of a new car with the MG Lola in the ALMS. So the expectations, I don't think, were undue. We weren't putting a lot of pressure. It was a new car, but it just so happened that my car had reliability, and James and Butch, who were doing a great job, just struggled that year. So I just outpointed everybody and ended up winning the championship that first year. And it was terrific for me because it backed up what we had done in 02, but I felt like it was a more complete racing season given the benefit of a year's experience.
And how did you find it? Because at this point, you're kind of racing against people like JJ Leto, Johnny Herbert, Frank Biela, all these kind of like Le Mans, I guess, legends. And it's kind of your first sort of full season of sort of high level racing. I mean, you must have thought you kind of arrived at that point. Because I mean, it's a big pressure because obviously all these big names that you've probably been reading about.
Well, the year before, I would say 02 was really the wake up call because we were up against Didier Taze and Marabaldi that year, who were veterans who knew their way around the block.
Were they in Dallara, Chris, or what car were they in?
Yeah, they were in a Dallara Judd that year. And that steeled me for the head-to-head combat. In 2003, it was I don't want to say it was a learning year. I mean, I feel often now, I don't feel like it was an easy championship because, once we knew we were playing in the game, every single race mattered. So, in some respects, because we had a little bit of a points lead, I could be more conservative. It wasn't just, we had to hammer it every single weekend.
Yeah.
But I think around 2004 is where I felt like personally I started to hit my stride. The speed really started to come along. I always thought my race averages were very good, and Andy Wallace was a terrific benchmark.
Yeah.
You know, and when you look at our stint averages, I was always right there on the long races, particularly, and a lot of the sprint races. But I'd say probably around 2004 and into 05 is where I felt like, you know, JJ, Lato, and Johnny and the Audi guys, you know, I was not only on they're starting to get on more on their level for the races, but my one lap pace was getting better.
Yeah, you felt a bit more like you belonged, kind of. You felt like you know, you were part of that group. And in 2004 was your first visit to Le Mans, right? That was with Jan Lammers.
That's right.
So how did you find Le Mans? What was your kind of? I mean, I think everybody I spoke to that's done Le Mans, it's a massive shock when you get there, no matter how much experience or what you've done previously. I mean, how did you find it? Was it? I mean, was it everything that you thought it was going to be? Did it live up to expectations?
It was the best experience because it was Jan Lammer's team.
Yeah.
And Jan is one of these guys who is truly one of my heroes. I love that man, and I'll be forever grateful for that opportunity. I had been watching him race since I was a kid when he ran for the Walkinshaw Jaguars. And we had been in touch just because I was looking, actually, this was before I discovered Guy Smith. And I needed a teammate for the long races in the US. And Jan and Andy Wallace had been Jan's teammate for a long time and had actually driven with Jan in 2003 at Le Mans. So Andy kind of got us together, and Jan and I started talking, and I said, look, I need someone for the endurance races this year. And he said, well, that's good because I need someone for Le Mans. And I said, okay, well, you know, we should talk about that. And so he came and did Le Mans, or did Sebring with me, and we had an absolute blast.
Yeah.
We started talking shortly after that, and he said, look, I've still got a slot at Le Mans. Would you like to do it? And it was still, you know, it was one of those things where Le Mans is the big granddaddy. I mean, it is the pinnacle of endurance racing. And I don't think a year earlier I would have been ready for it. But the timing was good, and to get the opportunity to go over there and run with Jan with a car that had won the FIA World Championship in 2002 and 2003, I knew I was going to get a benchmark team. They were Dunlop's factory team. We had very close ties with Goodyear, so there was that continuity, being that those were kind of sister companies for tires. And Jan was really at his peak as far as team ownership. They were going to run two cars. And we ended up going over there, and Katsutomo Kanishi was in the car with us and with Jan. And the great part about the weekend was that the second car guys were amazing too. I mean, Tom Coronel and Justin Wilson and Ralph Furman, we all got on great, and the week was a thrill. The weather was fantastic the whole time, which isn't always the case there. And that car was so fast down the straights. I mean, I think we were going like 215, like, you know, down towards Indianapolis. And that was the fastest I'd ever been. And around that joint, it feels fast.
Which engine was in that car? Was it a Mugen, or was it a Judd? Or
it was the 4-liter Judd,
right.
which, you know, ultimately they went up in displacement to get more torque, but that was the one that made the power up top. So right. You were revving up to, like, I think we were probably like in the mid-10s for revs. So it was a screamer, and it was a rocket. It was kind of built to excel there.
Yeah, and that car was super slippery, wasn't it? It was so, like, in a straight line. It was just like you said, like a rocket. And at least you finished 7th as well, so you had a good result. I mean, it wasn't like you gone there and had like a DNF, and you had the full experience. So it was good. So then in 2005, yours truly, we kind of got chatting. I mean, we met in 2002 at Le Mans, wasn't it? When I was Bentley's reserve driver. So I was kind of like moping around the hospitality tent, kind of wishing I was driving. And I think you were there.
I was also there in 2002 wishing I was driving, Guy, behind the catch fence.
we should have met up and had some beers, but I couldn't drink. I think Chris was having a few beers with Randall, and they were over there kind of, I think, taking a look at the MG at the time, actually. And that's how Chris and I met, and we kind of stayed in touch. And Chris invited me to do the long races in 2005 with him in the MG. So we did Sebring and Petit Le Mans together in Atlanta. And we had a blast. I mean, I think our first race in Sebring, we were actually pretty quick, but we had a pretty eventful race. I think I started the race, I had 3 punches in about 4 laps. or something like that. It was one of those kind of races, but I don't even believe we finished. But we were fast.
We finished.
We did finish, did we? Yeah.
So you got out. I had to finish it. So you don't forget those.
But we just did it with the two of us. So again, normally with any sane people would do Sebring with three drivers. We did it with two, on the basis that we thought we were the young pups and we could, more seat time. And then of course we did Petit Le Mans together, where we finished second overall, which was a great result. And I think Chris and I just realised then that we got on well out of the car, but we also complemented each other in the car. The way we had like the setup and the way that we worked together, we had a pretty strong relationship.
I do have to say, by the way, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, if you head to Chris's Instagram, there's a lovely picture of this very car, and it is one of my favourite race cars, in the colours from that year, just like Guy's shirt, if you're watching this. Freshly restored over this last winter, wasn't it, Chris, in the workshop?
Well, yeah. So the car that Guy and I raced, which is the car that we won the '03 championship with, I've had for the last 6 years. I reacquired it after selling it, and that car is actually back to the same spec that Guy and I raced it with. We just completed the restoration of the sister car, which is going to a new home. But we still have all the spares. I mean, if we wanted to reconstitute a greatest hits collection, we could go out and run the MG together.
But you do need to check that photo out on Chris's Instagram, because it is a beautiful looking car.
Yeah, and I think the Dyson colours, the thing for me as well, the Thetford colour scheme, the blue and white, is quite iconic. I certainly knew all about it before I even joined the team, and then of course throughout that time it became iconic, much as the team became iconic in the US. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the colour scheme. And then in 2006, Chris and I sort of joined. We went full time together in the ALMS with the new. It was the BO610, is that right? The Lola BO610. So we'd gone from the MG. Why was the kind of change to the Lola, Chris? Why was just because the MG had kind of was not quick enough at that point, or just need a new car, or what was the change for?
So the rules were changing. We had held off the rules, actually, I think pretty effectively held off the rules from being imposed on us from the ACO by getting a couple of extra years with IMSA's support and cooperation to grandfather the Audi R8 in its old configuration and the MG in its original configuration. I think that those years were actually two of the coolest years that the series had.
Yeah.
Specifically because they pushed back and said, we're not going to chop wings off, we're not going to add weight, and we got to keep the show vibrant. But by the end of 04, coming into 05, it was clear that they weren't going to find a great mechanism for effectively grandfathering the old cars for much longer. In retrospect, we may have gotten another season out of it. But looking at the new regs, Lola had done a pretty intensive study. They had an LMP2 car that they had built and started developing, and they wanted to go LMP1. AER wanted to go LMP1. So we just proceeded with the partners we had, and that was, I think it was the right choice based on what we knew at the time, because and certainly the car, if you look at the lap times compared to the previous year, it was over a second faster everywhere, which was a pretty substantial jump. And it was also legal for the new rule set. What no one had been expecting was that the Audi diesel was going to show up and that the regulations were going to be so one-sided. Nor did we expect that LMP2 was going to be treated eventually as an equivalency formula. And again, this is kind of nerdy, but like the previous regs had an LMP 900, which was cars like the R8 Audi, and the LMP 675, which was cars like the MG Lola and the Zytek, right? And that was built on an equivalency premise. LMP2 was not. So going into 2006, you had every reason to believe that if you built a petrol P1 car, that was the car to have to win in the top category. But as the year played out, it was clear that we were fighting a two-front war. On the one hand, you had the Audi diesel that showed up after Le Mans and just walked the races. And then you had the Porsche, which was absolutely faster than what they were showing. And we were all kind of playing this dance of, who's right. And, we only ended up running that, the 0610 for a year. I think we got it at the end. It was a gem to drive. And certainly it was fast as hell. The last few races, Guy, you and I were just rocking in that thing.
Were the politics quite big at that point, out of the car? With the politics kind of getting on top of you on that year with everything going on?
Paul, that was, that year was just exhausting. Guy and I were on vacation in France, and I think I spent most of the time on the phone every day with the series people, because we had, in essence, been trapped by the regulations, and the series knew it. It was very bumpy. I mean, the Portland race weekend, I'll be able to write about that one in my book, but that was borderline Armageddon for everybody. And, we'll tell the story someday.
What were they trying to do with that, though? Was there an aim, or did they just get it wrong? Save the best bits for the book, if you like.
No, it's complicated. And it was, and that's a political, kick the can answer, but it really was complicated, because the series at the time had to decide how it was going to be funded. And you've got two of your biggest corporate sponsors in the Volkswagen Audi group brands, being Audi and Porsche, building cars to compete with a lot of ancillary income to the series. At the same time, you've got a rule book that you've published that predicates another outcome. And I think it was that balance of appeasing the commercial interests and trying to adhere to the objective of the rules and the spirit of the rules, where they got unsighted. But we ended up sticking around. We didn't leave in a huff, and I think in retrospect, it was probably the right decision. But that led us to a point where we were saying, you know what, we should try to figure out a way to become less of a outside agitator, I guess. Fifth column movement. I mean, we could have fought for ideological purity. I mean, God bless him. Henri Pescarillo tried it for the next couple of years. I think he had a challenging time with that, because he was at Le Mans too. But the IMSA people were really trying to come up with a great balance. And certainly Guy and I, ran front row. We were on podiums. We were fast laps. It was going to be really hard to beat the Audis. And we knew going into 07 that the Porsche program was going to get stronger, and the Hondas were coming in LMP2. So we knew then and there that there was no fight against LMP2 movement that you could do. So
you're talking about the regs and talking about the politics and talking about what was going on outside of the car. Was there ever a moment at this point, or did it come later, where you just thought, I'd quite like just to be able to jump in and drive the car without having to run the business and get my head around the politics and the regulations at the same time? Was there ever a moment when you just wanted to be that guy that jumped in and drove? Not that guy, but that guy, if you know what I mean.
I think
you thrive on it.
Paul, I think it's a great question. I think I was oriented towards being involved in a lot, from those who much is given, much is expected. And I felt like I'd been given a tremendous opportunity by my father to try to take the team forward. And I think once you take on that responsibility, you've got to sign up for what comes with the turf. The driving side was always the best part. The on-track driving, the fun with the teammates, and the engineering of the car, the testing particularly, that was all the best. The politics did become exhausting. And when I look back on it, I couldn't decouple my roles at the time, but I think in retrospect, it would have been nice to have some assistance. But at the same time, I was the one that was pushing the series as hard as I was and exerting as much pressure as a private entrant could. And in a lot of ways, we had gotten the 2003, 4, and 5 seasons out of that. But eventually it comes a point where you get up against, the might of organizations that have entire departments dedicated to political warfare. And that's when it became a little tedious. The 2 years with Porsche, a lot of that was handled by them. So when we took over the Mazda program in 2009, I felt like I was better prepared to spread my workload out, but there were times in 2006 where it did become overwhelming.
Because you were pretty, I mean, I remember 2006 pretty well, and you know, you were also pretty involved with, you know, business stuff outside of motorsport as well. I remember you were doing your development there, so you had that you were working on, plus the sort of working with the team, plus the driving. I mean, I've experienced it now that now that I get back in the car, you know, and I've got stuff going on outside of racing. I say to you, I don't know how you did it, because it's just so much going on. You know, to be able to deal with it all and then to jump in the car and perform, it's really difficult. I have a lot of respect for you now, having experienced it myself, to say, wow, you know, to jump in at that level and perform, it's not easy. So, you know, it's, you know, respect for you for doing that. But yeah, I think going into sort of the next couple of years, you know, we went to the Porsche Iris Spider. I think it was a pretty kind of golden era for sports car racing in terms of IMSA racing. I mean, you know, if you look back at it, there was us with the Iris Spider. Penske had 2 Iris Spiders. You had Andretti, Fernandez, Highcroft with the Acuras, plus of course the 2 factory Audis. And they were in LMP1, we were all in LMP2. But in terms of the equivalence, you know, we were much faster in the corners, they were much faster on the straights, but it made for great racing. And although we didn't necessarily feel like we got the fair crack at the whip in terms of what we got from Porsche, you know, the racing itself was incredibly tight and competitive. And I think you look back at it now as, you know, outside of sort of the 80s and 90s when your dad was racing, that's probably the closest thing we've come to seeing like a bit of a golden era of sports car racing, certainly in America. But it was a fun time, wasn't it? Fun period to be racing, sure.
You know, I mean, it was an incredible time because, you know, we were running on the bill with the Indy cars, and you would see the IndyCar grid, and then you would see our grid, and there was no difference in terms of quality and depth. You know, if you look at 2007 and 8, the level of driver talent, the teams who were involved, actually the speeds were incredible. I mean, the Porsche Spider whole time around St. Pete, I think would have put the car 3rd on the grid for the IndyCar race, 3rd or 4th.
Yeah, I mean,
that was incredible. And so you had fast cars, a lot of diversity of you know, of power plants, personalities. We had IndyCar teams actually coming in. It was exciting, and it was also exciting because you had the OEMs driving the tire development, which was making it even, you know, the testing got more intense. And for you and me, Guy, I mean, I look back on those years as really important years because we, you know, I think in some respects we're fighting a little bit with one arm tied behind our back. But when I look at the results we were able to pull out and the speed we were able to pull out, you know, I think in retrospect, you realize now why our engineering team was actually a lot happier with what we were doing than you and I were doing, because they knew what we were getting.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think some of the speed and some of the performances we put on, it didn't feel like it at the time, but the level we were driving at was very high, and that was a benefit of being in a series that had pushed us along. We had already been up front to begin with, and it just made us raise our game.
I mean, we've talked about it on the other podcast, the 1620 Lounge, that you've been, you know, working on with me, which has been a lot of fun. And we talked about the kind of IMSA or ALMS era, and you know, probably at the time, you know, we talk about that period right through till 2012, 2013. I mean, you know, just how much fun it was, but just how much how great the racing was. I mean, it's still great now, but we look back and say, well, we drove in such a great era when the cars were really cool. It was a little bit, there wasn't really the social media in the same way that it is now. It was a little bit more kind of like, you know, the fan base was, you know, very loyal, and we just got to race at some cool circuits. I think, you know, we look back now and say, well, I think we definitely, you know, ran in a really cool time to race and really enjoyed it. And I think, you know, the ALMS won't be the same. I think now we've obviously got IMSA WeatherTech series, which is what it is. But you know, the ALMS of old was certainly a lot of fun. And you know, to look back, you know, to you to win the championship in 2003, and for you and I to win it in 2011, you know, it's great to have your sort of name on that trophy and be able to do that. So
as well, 675 and then the LMP1. That's a fantastic story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great to get the championship. I mean, you know, it took a lot of trying, didn't it, Chris? We tried for many years. 2011 was a really special year. You know, it was kind of up and down, and it was a bit of a roller coaster. But you know, it was great to get that championship and to get it together, wasn't it?
We were so lucky. I mean, it's just one of these things. It's a blink of an eye, and it only gets more satisfying, I think, in retrospect. I think the thing that a lot of the things that have been lost to time were the real bonuses of what we got to do when we did it. Tire development, engine development, aero development, on-the-fly suspension development. I mean, these are things that right now you have to go through. It's like a UN, World Health Organization to get anything approved, right? So, to be part of that kind of, we thought, to be honest, we thought we were kind of a pale imitation of the 80s when we were doing it. But when you realize it in context, it's a very confined formula now. You've taken out the variables and then you kind of put this enforced homogeneity through social media and the corporatist kind of spirit where everyone's got to kind of virtue signal and say the right thing. It does make you realize that it was pretty special to be in a time where, you could change things, do things. There were winners and losers, and people dealt with it. And, they didn't cry. They went and focused and got better. They made their products better. They made themselves better. They didn't just sit there and let the nanny state try to change and adjust things. But it was definitely a great time, Guy. We were so lucky, and it was so much fun. And I'd love to go back and do it again. I will say, I see these guys in the IMSA series now, the cars they're running, the lap times they're doing, and the formula they've got. And it's been a long time, but I've been kind of like looking at it and saying like, that'd be pretty cool. Obviously, we're doing the WEC together now. Yeah. P1 cars, I think this last gasp are the most exciting cars and the best regulations in a lot of ways. So to me, it's a gift to come back, do it again with you now, yeah, and underline what we did before, because it makes it seem like less of a dream. And it's unbelievable that it actually happened in reality.
And you're right, because then there was no kind of BOP. It was like we were on Dunlop, against Michelin. We were Lola versus Acura. We were AR versus Honda. So you kind of, all you did was just kept pushing. Like with Dunlop, you push and get a new tire, a new front tire. Try this, try that, and it was kind of, that was the cool stuff, the development. Whereas of course now with BOP and kind of putting everything in a box, there isn't really any development. It's just that's kind of gone. So I think
there's been energy with that kind of era of American sports car racing that's come out in a few of the podcasts we've done, Guy. Derek Bell was talking about it, Stefan Johansson. They were talking about the fact that they enjoyed their sports car racing in Europe, but they went to America and it was almost like everybody had just thought, we're actually here at the end of all of the politics and all of the development and everything else and the commercials. We're here to have fun and enjoy the racing. And that seems to have come out here as well.
Yeah, I certainly enjoyed racing in America more than Europe. And it's a combination of in America, the competition is as hard as it's just fact. It's as hard as it is in Europe, no matter. But off the circuit, it's a little bit more relaxed. I just mean that everybody's a bit more open, a bit more friendly. And that might be the nature of the way the paddock is laid out. Whereas, Europe, everybody's kind of in their own garage and nobody leaves the garage. Whereas in the US, everyone's working from kind of all in from the trucks and it's a little bit more open. And I just think it's a generally more friendly atmosphere. So like Derek said, when you're driving for a manufacturer in Europe, it's very much, this is what you do. You don't speak to the competition, and it's kind of a bit of a stifling environment. And then you go to America and it's completely the opposite. You tend to embrace it because it's like, wow, this is great. I'm racing cool cars with cool people on some of the best circuits in the world. And, what is there not to love about it? And certainly, again, I probably didn't really appreciate it fully at the time until you come back and race in Europe and you go back to that kind of like, this is how we do it. You don't speak to other people and you think, well, this isn't really much fun. This isn't what I signed up for. So, I think we've got the best of it. But as I said, as Chris mentioned, now that we're racing WEC, it's kind of cool that we get to hang out and spend time together. And of course, with Mike Simpson, who was our first guest, who's a great guy. We certainly have a laugh and enjoy it. So it makes it fun. So.
And you guys took the Gt3 Bentley Project, of course, to the US.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. That program. It was again, when the ALMS ceased to exist and it merged with the Grand Am series, there wasn't a clear path for us. Our cars were immediately obsoleted, but yet we wanted to stay racing. And again, that was another great piece of timing. It happened that Guy started developing the Bentley in sort of 2012. He was leaving races. I remember, Guy, you were on your best behavior, after events because you had tests to get back to. So he'd spent a lot of time working on that program to get it resurrected. And they started with the M Sport program, and we were in a position where, heading into 14, God, we were kind of out of options. There was no easy choices. And, Guy mentioned to me that Bentley was eager to do a North American program in addition to their Works blank pound deal. We looked carefully at the what was then called the World Challenge. I think it's now called the SRO World Challenge America, but the Pirelli World Challenge, and they were really on the come. And the main reason for it was they had actually embraced GT3 in its original guise, and were running U.S. friendly races. So they would run basically hour-long sprint races, usually 2 a weekend. And the format looked really good, a little bit different than the endurance formula Guy was in, but Bentley had built this car and he had done the work on it. So I knew it was going to be a really good package. And they had started to do very well with it out of the box. So I was pretty excited when we were able to agree to become Bentley's work supported team for 14 and 15. And that was actually, it turned out to be a high point of the World Challenge, and I think any of the drivers who were in it, and Guy got to do some races with us and won and did fantastic. But those, I would put some of those race results in that series right on par with some of our prototype accomplishments, because talk about depth and golden age. I mean, you had, I think we had 8 or 10 manufacturers, any number of which could have won. It was kind of one of those deals where, like, if you got into the top 5, it was an accomplishment. So to win a race in those days was a big one. And we had a lot of fun with it. And we had some great success. Tom Hodgson, who ran the program, is still a great friend. And Guy, we got to maintain our connection that way.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate what happened with the Dieselgate thing at the parent company level, but for the couple of years we got to run the program, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And then since then, Chris, you've kind of been doing, kind of the sprint car stuff. So tell us a little bit about the sprint car stuff. I mean, it's quite a big departure from racing, sports cars with loads of grip and loads of downforce to do.
Oh, it's wicked as well.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's your kind of like, I mean, every time I speak to you about it, you just absolutely just follow, just love it, don't you? I mean, it's absolutely your guilty pleasure.
So originally it started as kind of my methadone to withdraw from LMP1 cars, which I knew I wasn't going to get to drive for a while. And I knew that with the World Challenge, we weren't going to have the testing that we always had for the prototype cars. I'd always had a fascination with dirt racing sprint cars. The World of Outlaws used to come every year to Orange County in Middletown, which is about 45 minutes from me. And there is nothing that puts your heart in your throat more than watching a 410 wing sprint car run around a dirt oval. And
why? Tell us why. Paint the picture. Why? What's so cool about that?
Well, I mean, for starters, there's the 900 to 1,000 horsepower component in a car that weighs about, probably about 1,000 pounds. And the acceleration is just unlike anything you've ever seen. And just the skill set. the ability to adjust to the changing conditions. It's like no other. I mean, there's no question in my mind that the guys that are driving in the World of Outlaws and that are in the highest levels of USAC racing would be the fastest and best at anything they do because of the diversity of tracks, the frequency with which they race, and the fact that there's absolutely no guarantees you're going to be in a starting field. But I going back to how I got involved with the sprint cars, I'd had a latent curiosity for a long time, and I'd been wanting to drive one. I think it started because I'd kind of come from oval racing as a kid. Hadn't done IndyCar racing because we were in sports cars, but always wanted to race on ovals. And it was a little bit of a sore point with my parents, I think always previously, because open wheel racing was verboten and had been for my dad as well. I snuck off and did an Atlantic season in 2005, and we kind of didn't talk much about that. But I'd had a hankering to get in and just see what sprint cars were like. So I hooked up, courtesy of Jared Andretti, John's son. Jared had actually mentioned that I should hook up with Corey Kruseman. Corey Kruseman is a multiple oval champion who has his racing headquarters and a racing school based out in Ventura, California. So on the very first race weekend that I wasn't in a ALMS weekend at Mosport, rather than sulking and being upset about it, I was strapping myself into a 360 non-wing car to go out and do my very first laps around Ventura's Fairgrounds Speedway. And it ignited pretty immediately a love affair for me with oval racing and dirt racing, short track racing that continues to this day. And I've been fortunate to do a lot of it the last 5 years. And it really was something that I was able to do, to keep myself busy between, sort of GT road racing things and get away from, I don't want to say get away from the spotlight, but just really focus on my craft. I feel like it was something, a guy I think does the same thing with his rallying. You go to a different place, you're at square one, you're level. No one is sitting there saying, oh, this guy should be great. And, you've got to kind of earn your chops and earn your way in. Those events, you got to qualify your way in. You talk about stress. If you've gone all the way out to California to go run in a racetrack where there's, 40 cars going for 24 spots, it's tough to go home. And it's really satisfying when you make it. And it was funny for me. I won the race in World Challenge race at Road America. And the next weekend I went out and did a race out in Santa Maria. And I made the features for the midget race and the sprint car race. And I felt as much satisfaction for making those races as I had for winning Road America the week before. Right. Kind of weird to say it, but it's such an unfamiliar thing. And it was such a steep learning curve. I think I have this problem with steep learning curves where I view it as a great challenge. But we've built up since then, I've built up my own little program, and a guy named Sean Michael runs it for me down in Pennsylvania. And we set that up so I could go back to racing. We started that in the end of 2017 at a time where I hadn't road raced for almost a year and a half. And then I got back into Trans Am and started doing that. But the USAC and dirt racing stuff is still continuing to be a part of my life.
Yeah. And NASCAR is now part of your life, although albeit so far a small one. You did an Xfinity race last year. Is that going to be something that features a bit more? Because I'd love to see you out in a NASCAR race.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would love to. I was that deal came about, interestingly enough. The deal that Mid-Ohio happened because Andy Lally, who's a friend of mine, had been doing that race the previous 2 years with a team. And I had made an inquiry to him because we had one of our businesses, Norcold, is based in Ohio, and Thetford is based up in Michigan, which isn't too far of a drive from Mid-Ohio, Mansfield. And Trans Am was racing there that weekend. And I called Andy and said, look, if you're doing this event, is there any way we could get with you and be on the car and be part of the team effort? And Andy got back to me and said, I can't do the race because I've got a sports car conflict. but call the team owner. He'd probably put you in the car. And I thought, oh, that wasn't the purpose of this call, but okay. And again, it was like a deep breath, like called this guy, Mario Gosselin, who had run Andy and owns the 90 car that I got to drive. And we had a nice conversation, and we were able to work out a deal that actually, in essence, enabled me to have 2 Thetford-sponsored cars for that weekend. And we had quite a few guests. It was a customer appreciation day. And I think it was really cool for them to have a car to root for in the big show. Mm. From a personal perspective, I had never sought out driving stock cars, but there had always been in the back of my mind, I think for every American, you wonder, what it would be like. I had a bunch of friends who had done road racing. Butch Leitzinger obviously was a phenomenal road racing ringer in NASCAR. James Davison, who's a friend, had done it more recently. And I had seen these guys, and Andy Lally, I'd seen these guys go out and do well. And I talked to Lally about it, and he said, dude, you're going to love this. He goes, you're not going to believe how much you love this. And he was right. Andy gave me a handbook, some wonderful notes on how to drive Mid-Ohio, which were kind of indispensable, and went out and just gave it my best. And I think Mario was pretty happy with the performance, and we've talked about possibly doing some more. It's going to come down to scheduling. The coronavirus has screwed things up a little bit, but it was a lot of fun. And a lot of people had told me, oh, the cars are going to be, tough to race. And, but driving the Trans Am cars, which have, more horsepower than the NASCAR cars, I felt like I was ready for it. But the thing that is just incredible is how close the racing is and how competitive it is. You got 40 cars out there within a couple of seconds. That's hardcore fighting. And it was a good rookie effort. I think I acquitted myself okay. Lousy qualifying. Wasn't expecting the new tires to be as good as they were. But I figured for the race we'd be decent. And then in race trim, we got up to 10th, and it was looking pretty good. And then on the restarts, they do these double file restarts. And unfortunately, there's a lot of guys there that I think there's a game to trying to out-psych the guy next to you. And then there's these weird rules about passing before the line. And everyone is trying, you're fighting for inches, and everyone is back and forth. And it went green, and they went, and then they lifted. And when they lifted, I was going, and the guy stopped in front of me, and I got into him, and then I got soda can from behind. So it was definitely a welcome to the jungle kind of moment. And unfortunately, it was an early end of the day.
It's hard not to make Days of Thunder quotes with that, never having driven a stock car before. And
yeah, I wasn't yelling, on the radio like Cole Trickle or anything, but it was a joy to do. And Mario's team got me up to speed, and I was just wow, to do this again would be just a thrill. And hopefully we can get something together. It's just going to come down to how things work out with the Trans Am schedule and kind of what racing is allowed at this point over here.
Yeah. One thing that fascinates me about NASCAR, having been a fan for a lot of years and watching the races from over here, is the commercials. We don't have anything like that kind of commercial drive in motorsport in Europe at all. And everything is monetized, and even the teams at the back of the grid are making a lot of money out of the TV rights, and that side of it fascinates me.
It's a behemoth, and it's a successful business model because they take care of they spread the money around. They've got these good TV deals, which the tracks get to participate in. When you get a date, you get a fixed amount of money every year. So that's the incentive for you to keep investing in your facilities. They've got a good spread of money paid around to at least help teams out with TOF costs, make it attractive for teams to get up. You're running teams there with a lot fewer people than we do in certainly in Xfinity. I think the big league is more people, obviously, but you can see why the business model worked. The cars are restricted technically, and there's only so much you can do with them. But racing, I think, has suffered its own chops in the marketplace of ideas and commerce. I think certainly a lot of the big money that was in play when Guy and I were younger, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of that money has walked out. So now they're trying to make sure they can get the costs down for the value. But the fact is, they're still getting 40 cars to show up for Xfinity and the Cup Series every weekend. And there's people who in America who identify with the drivers, they're brand loyal. And, you know, I can't really argue with the show they put on, because when you're there, it's a hell of a show, especially on the road courses.
Yeah, it's good. So how are you enjoying the sort of Trans Am stuff? Because obviously last year you you came pretty close to winning the championship in your first outing. I know you had a couple of either DNFs or mechanical issues or whatever that put you out, that eventually winning the championship. But I mean, every time I speak to you, you always sort of go on about how fantastic the cars are to drive, and you're obviously really enjoying it. And I think you've only done one race so far this year before the coronavirus hit. So, I mean, you know, obviously the plan is to try and go for the championship this year and try and get that championship. Are you enjoying it? I mean, are you enjoying the cars to drive? Quite a lot different to the sort of the sports cars and stuff you've done in the past and sprint.
Again, they look cool, don't they? The cars look ace.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, they're such badass machines. And what will be cool about this year is that the series is invested in a live stream package. So worldwide, people are going to be able to, just by downloading the Trans Am app, we'll be able to plug in and see what we've been so excited about the last few years.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled about that.
And you'll tweet about that, and we'll share that. So when people listen to this, when that gets online, and when we get racing again, we'll share that, and people can actually join in and watch.
Yeah, because I went to follow the races last year, but it was very difficult to find the feed or whatever. So that'd be great to see it. And of course, there's a WEC. So far, you've only done the one race. Obviously, you've had clashing commitments with the with the Trans Am up until now, and for one, you had an injury as well. So unfortunately, you haven't had the chance to do the one race. But I mean, obviously, tell us about what you think about the sort of WEC car, the Ginetta. I mean, it's pretty awesome, right?
Well, I first of all, let's just talk about the fact, and you and I were kind of looking at each other last year when we got to test at Paul Ricard test, saying, "Oh my God, here we go again." Yeah. And well, I was
I'd been sat on the couch for a year and a half. You know, you'd been doing kind of the sprint car and the Trans Am stuff. We went to that test, didn't we?
This is the prologue test, wasn't it?
Well, this was actually pre-prologue test. It was just a kind of like it was actually a Ginetta test where Ginetta had got the track, and Chris and I kind of rocked up, and Chris sort of said, invited me, said, do you fancy coming and having a drive of the car, see what you think? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm curious to see what a current prototype's like. And Chris was exactly the same. It's like, well, why don't we just go along and have a drive of it? And of course, it's got the AR engine in, which Chris is involved with, and well. I mean, it was just we went out and we were kind of just blown away by it. And I think we could only do about 5 laps at a time. And you come in and you kind of exhausted. I was like, well, it's your turn, and do 5 laps. It's like, well, no, it's your turn, you drive. And it was just mind blowing. I mean, how fast that thing, particularly around Paul Ricard, which is quite high grip and high speed corners. But
it was quite big news, though, you guys going back. I was doing a local radio show on BBC Radio Humberside. And I know, Guy, you and I had a chat on that show later on. But when you went out to that test, that you guys were out there and back in racing was quite big news, because you've been a local driver. We were talking about that. We were actually following. There's very little news coming out of it until the prologue test. But we were following your progress a bit at the time. I wish I'd had this insight then. Yeah,
it was so much fun. It was great. It was great, on lots of levels. I mean, Chris and I had not seen each other for probably a couple of years, actually, because I think the last time was when I was racing the Bentley over with Dyson, and we'd not, for whatever reason, we'd speak regularly, but we'd not seen each other, and certainly not driven together for a couple of years. So it was a sort of a reunion of sorts, and it was great. It was great to get back together. And I mean, it was just mind-blowing, Chris, wasn't it, how fast the car was? Places like corners like Scene. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. And it still is mind-blowing now, but it's
no, Chris likes his high-speed corners. That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. believe it or not, I was, I've been driving these kind of mental institution cars the last couple of years. So, like, in terms of like the performance off the top and the torque, it was impressive I mean, it's incredibly impressive compared to the sewing machine engines that they used to let us race to get in something that really cranks like this. But when you've driven like 410 sprint cars and 360 Silver Crown cars and the Trans Am car, and they're all pulling like up in the upper minimum 700s to almost up to 1,000 horsepower, it kind of implants a level of expectation for what a car should do. And in fact, it was really funny when I went over to drive at the Abu Dhabi 24 hours a couple years ago. I drove the Aston Martin and I came in and I go, "Can you guys check the engine?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" I go, "Plug in. I don't think I'm getting any boost." And they plugged in. They go, "No, it's fine." And I said, "Well, can you crank it up?" And they said, "This is the most they'll ever let us run." And it was like, okay, I'm corrupted now by horsepower. But actually, to Guy's point, the physicality of driving the Ginetta was pretty high. And let's face it, we didn't do ourselves any favors with the seating arrangements. I mean,
also for you, because I've sort of, I think I was in Charlie Robertson's seat, so or Mike's seat, so I kind of fitted in it. But I mean, you had no seat, so literally you were sat on the carbon floor with your back against the carbon tub, and
Really?
Yeah, I mean, literally, there's no support. I mean,
so no lateral support at all.
I mean, literally nothing. I mean, the problem is the way the cockpit's designed is because of like FIA rules. There's these dimensions. It's got to be certain. It's got to be so. You get to a point where, in order to get your head not hitting the ceiling, you have to sort of slide down to get your head height right. But of course, that then means that you are then closer to the pedals. It means you're closer to the steering wheel. So they end up, it's a constant sort of balancing act between getting the legs, the steering wheel, and the head height. And of course, there's not a lot of tolerance. There's not a lot of room. So literally, in order to run the test, just to kind of do the test, it was kind of like, well, we're going to have to take the seat out just to run. And that's what we did with Chris. I remember on the evening, he had all these like bruises and lumps. And I mean, you're like the Hunchback of Notre Dame when you got out the car. But
how do you actually hold yourself in place? Are you using your legs to do that?
Just abs of steel, man.
yeah, your core is doing the work on that.
No, to Guy's point, I mean, it was unfortunate for us because both of us wanted to do a lot more than I think the ergonomics allowed us to do in that test, but it was enough to put the needle back in the vein. And, Lawrence Tomlinson is just a gem. And he's a car owner out of his own heart because he's forthright, Northern English, no bullshit. I'm not sure if I can say that, but
you can say that.
Family podcast. But, he's direct and he wants to win and he's made a huge investment in the program. So for Guy and I to get the chance to drive these things, and again, this is like an uncut gem, the Ginetta. Again, if you look at the pantheon of cars, it's kind of like these diamonds that we've found with like the MG Lola. I mean, the Ginetta really effectively out of mothballs has come out and has been a car that's as fast as the Rebellions. And from a personal standpoint, the tragedy is we didn't get to go to Sebring because I know we would have been competitive there. But going back to that first test, the thing that blew my mind was actually the low speed performance. And actually, from a perspective of Guy and I having driven GT cars for a few years, the thing that, for a lap time perspective, the sad thing about racing generally is that slow corners are where the lap time is, right? So we talk about flat out and high speed. If you go clear around the slow speed, that's actually better for the lap time. But at Ricard, coming into like the last section, you just come honking down and you just brake and just come off the brake and just let it eat on the right front. And the amount of grip that it retains, I think that was the shock for me of getting back into a prototype. But the beautiful thing is that from when I drove it there to when I raced it at Bahrain, Guy and Peter Weston and Mike Simpson had done a great job with the Ginetta guys getting the car really good, and we've sorted out the seat thing so we were comfortable. It's a privilege to race that thing, and they're tight. They're not built around 6'2" anymore. I don't even know whose size they're built around. Anorexic elf. But it's still a special car to race, and I'm desperately hoping we get to Le Mans this year. I know the team's intending on being there. It's just going to come down to the pandemic. Hopefully it subsides like it's been.
I look forward to seeing that. And I've written that quote down. You just throw it in and let the tire eat. I like that. I'm going to use that when I'm at the racetrack.
No, it's good. Well, hopefully we can get back racing again. I mean, they're talking about Spa in August and then Le Mans in September. So we just
But
don't
before
know.
that, Guy, you're going to be racing with me at Cadwell.
I am going to be hopefully racing the Lotus Cortina Cadwell. So that will be fun. I need to get
Not with me. Not with me. Again, I'm behind the catch fence.
I'm going to try and get out of this. I've got the shifter cart that Michelin gave me when I won Le Mans. So I don't know. It's ancient, but it's actually brand new, and I've never used it. So my plan is sometime in the next couple of weeks to try and get this shifter cart out, which will be good. Hopefully, good training to get back into it. So, I mean, there's so much to go. I mean, obviously, what a great career Chris has had, and you know, I think that the thing that I think is amazing is that you manage to balance everything. You know, the way you balance the driving. I know you've got, big family man. You've got a big family like I have, and I know you spend a lot of time with those guys. You're obviously on the board of DKM Group. You've got your stuff with AR. You've got your personal business projects. You've got so much going on. So I have a huge respect for what you do, and obviously we've been great friends. So no, thanks for doing this. I've actually got some questions for you now. So I'm going to. Is that okay, Paul, if I go ahead and...
I think we go with the quick fires, and don't forget the one from Derek as well.
Oh, yeah, of course, the Derek one. So, you ready for this, Chris? It's just basically first thing that comes into your to mind. So, Top Gear or Grand Tour?
Top Gear.
Now, this is Trans Am, sports cars, or sprint cars?
Oh, it's like trying to pick my favorite kid.
The cars won't hold it against you, though.
Honestly, blindfold. I'm going to punt on it. Blindfold me, spin me around, and whichever one I'm pointing at.
Okay. I'll let you. Beach holiday or adventure holiday?
With my complexion.
Okay.
We've got to say adventure holiday if it's a ski holiday.
It's great because every time we go on holiday together, there's like my wife and I are like out in the sun, like fully like typical Brits until we're like red raw. And Chris and his wife are kind of under an umbrella or under a tree somewhere, kind of like, like fully sun creamed up, couldn't be more opposite.
I mean, I'm like the English patient.
You are.
To get skin cancers removed. So even with these precautions, I can't escape it.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Okay. Understeer or oversteer?
Understeer. I like forward bite.
AJ Foyt or Al Unsasino?
Foyt.
V8 or V6?
V8.
V8, cool. So we asked Derek for his pass-along question, and we've kind of covered it, but I'm going to ask you the question anyway. And his question was, what inspired you to go racing? Not who. It's kind of what inspired you to go racing?
Probably being woken up from the nap in about 1983 or 2 or 3 and hearing the noise of the car and always being curious what it was like to be in that thing.
Cool.
From that point on.
Good answer.
Can I make an observation as well, Guy? In the series so far, racing drivers like dogs, not cats.
That's an interesting one.
100%.
Is that true? It's really 100%.
100% hit rate, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, we actually should
had dogs on the podcast, haven't we? Derek Bell's dog joined us for a while.
He did have a little bark. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know oversteer, understeer as well. I think that might be 50-50.
Yeah, well, we've got the Clio Bandit in Mike Simpson, haven't we? Who quite likes his understeer.
Yeah. Do you know about Clio Bandit, don't you, Chris? Mike did tell us a story about Clio Bandit.
I remember hearing a little bit of it when I was listening to that episode, but I was too busy thinking about him getting trapped in the cart as his dad's van flipped over.
I'll send you the link to Clio Bandit when Mike took out the whole field pretty much in one room. But actually, somehow he took out the whole field but came out in the lead. Yeah,
and then somebody's put it on YouTube and labelled it the Clio Bandit, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. I think we should put that on the spinning wheels.
I wasn't sure if it would offend him too much. I did refer to it a couple of times recently.
No, I think
seems legit.
I think we could that. So, Chris, do you have a question? We're not quite 100% certain who our next guest is yet, but
that makes it more interesting.
Yeah, do you have a question for them? It can be anything, literally anything.
who was your most important mentor?
Okay, good one. Right, who was your most
mentoring is a topic that I think is underexplored when it comes to sports and athletics.
Yeah. And who was yours?
I'm a product of many mentors.
Yeah.
I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I can't take a lot of sole credit for anything, that's for sure, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, we're grateful for you joining us on this, Chris, because although I knew a bit about you from your racing, and obviously with you being with Guy, I knew about that era. I've learned a lot more about American racing talking to you and about the different series, and listening to you talk about the sprint cars and the World of Outlaw stuff makes me really want to go and check that out on YouTube. Those monsters sound fantastic.
We could honestly talk about dirt racing and oval racing for several hours. I will warn you, Paul, it's highly addictive and it's highly available. Some of these online streaming services and the YouTube archive, once you jump into that realm, just be careful, because it will be something that you can become very easily obsessed with. And I've been trying to tell Guy, he's got to come to the Chili Bowl at least once, and he's got to come and drive a sprint car. And after we do that, we should maybe have one of these conversations.
I'll come with you and I'll film it for Spinning Wheels. Do a Spinning Wheels live. Sounds good.
Done.
Yeah, we've been everywhere. We've done NASCAR now, so that has completed the collection, Guy, on the Spinning Wheels podcast so far.
And sprint cars too.
And sprint cars, the one I wasn't actually expecting to include in that.
Yeah.
So what an adventure! And if you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget that we'll be on with another guest in maybe a week's time, maybe a couple of weeks' time. Things start to get busy pretty soon for you, and I don't think Guy.
They do, right.
And if you're on iTunes, you can watch it on YouTube as well. Thank you for joining us once again here on Spinning Wheels.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to say thank you to Chris as well. Just want to thank you. And also check out the 1620 Lounge. So Chris and I have been working on a little podcast, which is kind of focused around the sort of Dyson Racing team lounge. So we've had Butch Lightsinger on as the last guest. We had part 1. Part 2 is coming shortly. So also make sure that you check that out as well. And hope you enjoy it. And I just want to say thank you, Chris, and look forward to catching up with you soon. Thanks for being on.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Thanks again.